Good morning. It's always hard to follow Gail Smith, so will start with that. Let me just start with thanking Takora. Thank you for everything that you've set up with the network, the higher education network. You know, I happened to be in government when it was being set up, and it was an experiment, but it just has turned into such an incredible opportunity and such an incredible learning experience, even for those of us that may not be working in development right now. We've spent a lot of time learning from them, so thank you for everything you've done. Thank you, Dave, and the Global Development Lab, actually. So I get to serve on the advisory committee there, and it's actually been great to be a part of the learning and to see what's happening. Thank you to MIT, Bish and Amy. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing, and to all of you. You know, development works because we all talk to each other. Development works because we all learn from each other, and what you're doing here is going to make a huge difference. What I want to do today is talk to you a little bit about exponential change. And many times in development and in anything that we do, we look at small incremental changes that we can take, and how do we expand on them, how can we accelerate them. But I want to push us a little bit, and what I hope today to challenge you a little bit to think about exponential change. Because the world is transforming at a much faster pace, it's becoming much more dynamic, and it's becoming disruptive for good, and at the same time, it can create a lot more challenges. Disruption has the opportunity to do a lot, but disruption can also create lots of uncertainties. Uncertainties within people, uncertainties within communities, and we have to take account that both of those are existing simultaneously, and both of those we need to deal with at the same time. It's easy sometimes when we're living in the world of disruptive change or dynamic change to think that we can do more, we can do it faster, and we're at MIT, we can do it with technology. But think about the uncertainties it creates too. But you see it's happening everywhere in many areas, not just in development, in the media. What media organizations look like what they did 25 years ago? Where do you get access to information today? Some get it by podcasts, some get it by radio, some get it by e-news, some get it by newspapers. It's changing dramatically. The mediums by which we can get access to information is changing. The government's being disrupted. Look around the world. We had an election, other countries have had an election. Things are being disrupted, people are asking for change, and it's changing. Services are being disrupted. People are asking, how do I get access to my services in one place, not just 5 different places? How might we think about that? Finance is being disrupted. We used to think you go to a bank account, get a bank account, then get access to finance. Today, nobody even has faith in those institutions. In fact, people are like, let's go online and get other people to give us money. Let's forget the institutions from where we used to get money. So development has the opportunity, and I think the biggest opportunity is going to happen internationally, not just domestically, not here in the United States necessarily, to leapfrog the status quo. And what I mean by leapfrog is don't just think so linearly about what it is from point A to point B, but could we leapfrog change? Could we think about it so completely differently that the lines we had drawn don't even exist the way they used to anymore? Let me talk to you a little bit about some of the developments or disruptions that we're seeing, and to think through what's happening and what are these trends. We're moving from a linear world to a networked world. And let me give you an example of that. What used to be is I'm going to get information from here, and I'm going to transform it here. Let me give you an example of WeFarm. They take information from farmers in local communities around the world, translate what their challenges are, through SMS, by the way, and then give it to farmers in other parts of the world that might be facing the same problems. In this particular case, they're beginning to see where farmers in Peru are facing the same disease challenges with farmers in Uganda. That was not happening before. The diseases weren't happening before, not just the information exchange wasn't happening before. Climate change has changed what types of diseases we're seeing in which parts of the world. It's networked. It's a networked model. It's not a linear model. It's taking information from multiple places, aggregating that information, translating that information, and offering it back to someone in SMS. That's what networked is about. Those are the changes. We're moving from siloed to collaborative. We live in all of our silos. If you do healthcare, you do healthcare. If you do education, you do education. If you do energy, you do energy. It's not the world we live in anymore. We need to be more collaborative. Using open data to battle Ebola in Sierra Leone. In 2014, when the Ebola crisis came out, there was so much information in so many different places that no one group knew what was happening at all times, because there was a nonprofit working here, there was a government working there, there was a military group working there. So 3 organizations came together. I need to read them because I'll get them wrong. The Sierra Leone National Response Center, the UN Humanitarian Data Exchange, and the Ebola GeoNode. And they created a situation room that took open data from all of these organizations and created a place where everybody had access to that open data and could see what was happening and track the responses that were happening in those times. That's the collaboration that we need, and that's the collaborative opportunities that we have. Going from top down to bottom up. Boy, this election tells you a lot. We no longer are people looking for top-down solutions. And I challenge this because I think people are losing faith in institutions. Not just government, in the media, in banks, in everything. We have to rebuild trust. We have to rebuild trust from bottom up. That's what you all do anyway. But rethink building back faith in institutions from bottom up. Not just what we can do to help them, but what are they telling us that we need to change those institutions? That's our greatest challenge. We get to sit in the highest levels, different places, in ministries, in institutions, but we need to listen. Political revolutions are happening, but once you make that change, what's the governance model? It happened in Egypt, happened in Turkey, happened in Indonesia, happened in the Philippines, happened in the United States. This is not a developed country versus a developing country issue. This is worldwide. Our questions, our challenges is to think about what are we going to do in all of those other disruptions, including communications, including the media. How are we going to govern differently? We're moving from incremental to exponential. Before, like I said, you used to have to go to a bank. All of you already know M-Pesa, so I'm not even going to talk about M-Pesa as the example per se. But what I'm going to talk about is why this challenged the institutions. A central bank governor agreed in Kenya that it was okay to move finance from individual to individual. Not from individual to bank, bank to other bank, and then that to the individual. That's how banking works today. You can move it from individual to individual. That's transformative change. What more can we do with that transformative change? Do we have to have every institution in the middle of it? Do we need banks in the middle of every transaction? Can I transact with you directly? We've gotten used to the institutions the way they are. What are the other ways that we could be thinking about exponential change? Now we're here at a research institution and we're talking about evaluations, but I'm going to challenge even the Global Development Network, and I'm going to challenge all of you at research universities. I am at one. Sometimes we may not have all the research at the beginning of what's going to work and what's not going to work. We're going to have to take a risk. Because as these changes are happening so quickly, we don't know how to even leapfrog that thinking, or we're going to have to get our research to think about leapfrog research. Nobody predicted M-Pesa. No one. No one predicted the mobile phones. In fact, if you looked at the research, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we were betting on satellite phones. We were not betting on mobile phones. Even before mobile phones went to 100 million, the research said maybe it'll get to 10 million. So even in the research community, we need to think hard about what's happening and what's moving forward, not just what's in front of us. We're going from controlled to open. Indonesia is such an interesting example. During their elections in 2014, both candidates said that the elections were rigged, that there was ballot stuffing taking place. So 700 volunteers came together to capture different pieces of information, and they created a global group that started to created a website that took information that was happening on the ground and then took the official results to make sure that those two were meeting. And it was created an open website where community members could see what was happening, and the government could report what was going on, and you could see if ballot stuffing was taking place or what the numbers were. That website cost $54. With 700 volunteers who cared about their system not being rigged. That was Indonesia. We need a different approach. We need to transform systems and institutions to effectively adapt to this change. Many times when we talk about development and we talk about disruptive change, we talk about small organizations, social entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs that wanting to make change. We'll talk about lots of those examples. But in order for those entrepreneurs and those ideas to scale, the systems that they have to fight against also have to change. And we never talk about systems. We only talk about the entrepreneurs. How many of you are social entrepreneurs? How hard is it to change those systems? Right? Our jobs as research universities, our jobs as development professionals is to help think about where those changes, those social entrepreneurs, and how do we make sure those systems and institutions start to change also. Not just incrementally, not just one at a time, not just something that's happening. If this many people want to be social entrepreneurs in the world, something's changing. And we need to have our systems change along with it. So as research institutions, I challenge us to think about what systems also need to change, what institutions also need to change. How do we think about policy differently? How do we think about institutional change differently? Because that is exactly what we need to do. We can have lots of great entrepreneurs, lots of great ideas, but if none of them can scale, and that's what we need for social change, what are we doing? That's our challenge as researchers, to collaborate differently, not just within the silos of engineering and education, but with public policy. Because if we're not talking across those boundaries, we're also not changing that. The reason technology in developing countries has done so well is because there's been no institutions in the way to get in the way. As those institutions get in the way, they too start creating structures that make it harder. We need to think about how those institutions are going to change. We also need to think about big challenges like the role of data. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the ethical challenges. These are examples of Ushahidi. Many of you know about it. Taps into the power of localized data to understand and manage crises. But the challenge we face from a research perspective is who has access to that data? Whose data is that about? If you take data from international to domestic, domestic to international, who owns it? How is it being used? What are the ethical issues that we need to be thinking about? And how do we think about them? We need to think about the digital economy. Things are moving digital faster, sooner, quicker. And what we have the power to do with technology is institutionalize all of the inequalities that exist today in the world into the digital world. Or as we build a digital economy, how do we make sure that the access starts from the bottom up, not just from the top down? That is, to me, why M-Pesa is very interesting. Not because it's a people-to-people transfer mechanism. It's interesting because it started from how do I help the smallest customer transfer money to the next smallest customer? Not how do I help the banking institutions get to their customers? But we started from a bottom-up thinking of how can we make that happen? Can we think the same way with everything else that goes digital? Can we radically rethink that? Civic engagement. For those of you in the tech world, technology is great, people matter. True. We spend a lot of time on how cool technology is, how we're going to reach people through technology, but people matter, sentiments matter, understanding their feelings matter. There is no technology in the world that helps me understand your feeling of being angry, your feeling of being frustrated, your feeling of being unhappy. There's no technology in the world that captures that. Yes, you can put a smiley face on it, a frowny face on it, or whatever the heck you want to call it. You're going to have to learn how to talk to people. We're all going to learn how to talk to people. Our election taught us a very big lesson that we were not talking to each other. It's not about technology. It's about technology enhancing our ability to talk to others. If you want to change the world, if you want to change communities, if you want to change people, learn about the people. Not just the research that told you that someone's behavior is going to change with this, but actually go see what's happening in those communities when someone has it. Civic engagement is extraordinarily critical. It's more critical today around the world. Around the world, we're seeing the same populist concerns. People are unhappy with the systems the way they are. They want change to happen. Our challenge is to understand what we are going to do, how we are going to engage, not just with big systems, but with each other to understand how we can solve problems. Participatory budgeting is one interesting example where it started in Brazil. You had the ability, and actually New York City, half of the city council uses participatory budgeting too, which you go to the communities, you ask them to allocate the dollars where you want them to allocate them. Today, how often do you get a chance to participate in where your money gets allocated, even at the universities? Even within your communities? This is a very interesting idea, a very interesting model. It doesn't have to be huge. It's just a way for citizens to feel they have a voice into the government that they're in, into the systems that are building things for them. So as you leave this session, think about these questions. I like Deepak Chopra's quote. Instead of thinking outside the box, get rid of the box. Redraw the lines because they are already being redrawn. Get uncomfortable because we are already uncomfortable. Get more uncomfortable. If there's one thing that's changing, is that change is the only constant that exists today. The only constant we have is change. So how are we going to adapt to change on a regular basis when something happens? Climate events happen. Education events happen. Something's going to happen, and we have to be able to be adaptive. For those of you that are students, this is your world. You have to get comfortable with change. So as you think about development, and as you are here for the next 4 days, think about how you're going to institutionalize that change in the development process. What is that going to be? How are you going to lead that next wave to make that happen? So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing the rest of today.